The morning started like any other for Dr. Sarah Chun. She walked through the wildlife preserve, checking on the animals under her care. 23 years of veterinary work had taught her to read the signs. Today felt different. The air was too quiet. Even the birds seemed nervous. She stopped at the wolf enclosure first. Luna, the alpha female, paced near the fence. Her amber eyes tracked something Sarah couldn't see. The whole pack was restless. Sarah made a mental note to check the security cameras later. The bear habitat was next. Kodiak, a massive brown bear she'd rescued as a cub, stood on his hind legs, sniffing the air. His mother had been killed by poachers when he was barely 3 months old. Sarah had bottle-fed him, slept beside his cage during cold nights, and helped him grow into the magnificent creature he was now. But today, something was wrong with Kodiak, too. He kept looking toward the forest beyond the preserve. Sarah followed his gaze, but saw nothing unusual, just trees and morning mist. She continued her rounds, visiting the injured eagle they were rehabilitating and the family of foxes recovering from habitat loss. Each animal seemed on edge. Her radio crackled with static, which was strange. The equipment was new and worked perfectly yesterday. Around noon, the sky began to change. What started as a few unusual clouds became something impossible. The clouds moved in perfect geometric patterns, forming shapes that hurt to look at directly. Sarah grabbed her radio and tried to call the main office. Nothing but static. Her phone had no signal either. The animals were going crazy now. Every creature in the preserve was making noise, howling, roaring, screeching. It was like they knew something terrible was coming. Then she saw the light. It started as a pinprick in the strange clouds above. But it grew quickly, becoming a beam that cut through the sky like a sword. Where it touched the ground in the distance, trees simply vanished. Not burned or destroyed, just gone, as if they had never existed. Sarah ran toward the main building, but the light was moving faster than she could run. It swept across the landscape in her direction, erasing everything in its path. Roads, buildings, even the hills themselves disappeared. She changed direction and ran toward Kodiak's enclosure. If she was going to die, she wouldn't leave him trapped in a cage. Her hands shook as she fumbled with the lock. The bear was pressed against the back of his habitat, making sounds she'd never heard before. Not quite growls, not quite whimpers. The lock finally opened. Sarah threw the gate wide and stepped back. Go, boy. Run. But Kodiak didn't run. Instead, he moved toward her with careful steps. In his mouth was something small and brown. Sarah squinted and felt her heart stop. It was a cub. Not a bear cub. Something else entirely. The creature was about the size of a house cat, but built like a tiny predator. Its fur was golden brown with black stripes. Her eyes blinked at her from an elongated face filled with sharp teeth. 6 legs ended in retractable claws. It should have been terrifying, but it was clearly just a baby. The alien cub was injured. One of its 6 legs hung at an odd angle, and there was a gash across its back. It made soft chittering sounds, like a bird mixed with a purring cat. Where did you come from? Sarah whispered. Above them, the light was getting closer. She could feel heat on her back and smell something like ozone mixed with metal. Kodiak set the cub down gently and looked at Sarah with those intelligent brown eyes. He was asking her to help. Sarah didn't hesitate. She scooped up the alien cub, ignoring the way its claws instinctively grabbed at her shirt. The creature was warm and trembling. Its 4 eyes looked up at her with what she could only describe as trust. The light was almost on them now. She could hear a sound like the world being torn apart. Sarah looked around desperately for somewhere to run, somewhere to hide. There was nowhere. She did the only thing she could think of. Sarah wrapped her body around the injured cub and turned her back to the approaching light. If this was death, maybe she could shield the little one long enough for it to survive. The heat hit first, so intense it felt like standing inside a furnace. Then came the sound, not heard but felt in her bones. Sarah held the cub tighter as pain exploded through her body. Her last coherent thought was surprise that dying hurt less than she'd expected. Then, everything went dark. When consciousness returned, it came slowly. Sarah felt like she was floating in warm water. There was no pain, which surprised her. She remembered burning, remembered feeling her body destroyed by whatever that light had been. Voices reached her ears, speaking in a language she'd never heard but somehow understood. The words formed meaning in her mind without passing through her ears normally. The neural pathways are stabilizing. Remarkable. Her brain patterns are unlike anything in our databases. The physical reconstruction is complete. But look at these emotional resonance readings. She died protecting one of them, a HFY juvenile. According to our scans, she had never seen such a creature before. A human sacrificing herself for an unknown alien species. No wonder the council is interested. Sarah tried to open her eyes, but found she couldn't move. She was aware of her body, but couldn't control it. It was like being a passenger in her own flesh. She's conscious, one voice said. Begin the integration sequence. Light flooded her vision. Not the destroying light from before, but something gentler. As her eyes adjusted, Sarah saw she was in a room made of material that looked like pearl. The walls curved impossibly, meeting at angles that shouldn't exist in normal geometry. 3 beings stood around what appeared to be a medical table. Sarah realized she was lying on it, though she still couldn't move. The beings were tall and thin, with skin that shifted color like oil on water. Their heads were elongated, and instead of hair, they had what looked like fiber optic strands that pulsed with soft light. One of them noticed her eyes moving and approached. When it spoke, Sarah felt the words appear in her mind rather than hearing them. Be calm, human. You are safe. We are the Veltar, and you are aboard our medical vessel. You died on your planet 47 of your hours ago. We have restored you. Sarah tried to speak, but found her throat wouldn't work. The beings seemed to understand her confusion. Your vocal cords are still integrating with the new neural pathways. You will be able to speak soon. We have many questions, but first, you should know the HFY cub you protected survived. Your sacrifice saved its life. Relief flooded through Sarah's mind. The little creature was alive. We must tell you something else. The being continued, its color shifting to darker hues. Your world is gone. The entity that destroyed it was not natural. It was a weapon deployed by a species called the Drakmor. They are attempting to claim this sector of space for their empire. Sarah's mind reeled. Earth was gone, everyone she'd ever known. But the being's colors brightened. Your actions have changed everything. The HFY are a proud warrior species. They have never been in debt to anyone, especially not to what they consider a soft species. By saving their young, you have created a bond they cannot ignore. They have declared blood debt to your species. The being moved closer, its fiber optic hair pulsing faster. The HFY have joined the war against the Drakmor because of what you did. And, human Sarah Chun, they have requested that you lead them. 2 weeks later, Sarah stood on the observation deck of the Veltar vessel, watching alien stars through a window that bent space to show her multiple views at once. Her body felt different now, stronger. The Veltar had explained that the reconstruction process had enhanced her physical capabilities to help her survive in space environments. She could move again, speak again. But the knowledge that Earth was gone created an ache in her chest that never went away. 7 billion people, all the animals she'd cared for, her entire world, reduced to scattered atoms by a weapon she couldn't even comprehend. The only thing that kept her sane was the small creature that rarely left her side. Zix, as she'd named the HFY cub, had made a full recovery. He was larger now, about the size of a medium dog, but his behavior reminded her of the orphaned animals she'd raised. He followed her everywhere, his 6 legs moving in a complex pattern that was surprisingly graceful. His species was fascinating. The HFY were natural hunters with enhanced senses and reflexes that made them incredibly dangerous in combat. They could see in multiple spectrums, hear sounds across vast frequency ranges, and their claws could cut through most known materials. But Zix was different from the adult HFY she'd met. Adult HFY were formal, serious creatures who spoke in careful, measured words. They stood nearly 8 feet tall, with muscles that looked like they could tear apart starship hulls. Their faces were all sharp angles and predator features. They inspired respect through pure physical presence. Zix chirped at her and nuzzled against her leg. He was still playful, still curious about everything around him. When adult Kethvar visited the ship, he would press close to Sarah as if seeking protection from his own intimidating species. Sarah. The voice belonged to Dr. Kelthon, the Veltar scientist who had overseen her reconstruction. His colors shifted to formal blue-green patterns. The council wishes to speak with you. She nodded and followed him through corridors that seemed to reshape themselves as they walked. Zix trotted beside her, his tail, which split into 3 separate appendages, swishing with curiosity. The council chamber was vast, with representatives from dozens of alien species arranged in a circle that seemed to extend infinitely in all directions. Sarah suspected the room used the same space-bending technology as the observation windows. At the center stood war leader Caxthal, the Kethvar who had become their species' primary representative in this conflict. He was even more imposing than the other Kethvar, nearly 9 feet tall with scars that told stories of countless battles. His 4 eyes were the color of molten gold, and when he spoke, his voice rumbled like distant thunder. "Human Sarah Chun," he said, dropping to one knee in what Sarah had learned was a gesture of profound respect among his people. "The debt of blood remains unpaid. You saved a kit of our species at the cost of your own life. This has never happened before in our history." Around the chamber, other alien representatives watched with interest. Sarah recognized some of them now. The crystalline Zephi, who communicated through light patterns, the gaseous Norlem, who existed as sentient clouds, and the insectoid Trixver, whose hive minds could process information faster than most computers. "I don't need payment," Sarah said, her hand automatically moving to scratch behind Zix's auditory organs. "I did what anyone would do." A sound rippled through the chamber that took Sarah a moment to recognize as laughter from a dozen different species. Caxthal's colors darkened with what she'd learned was amusement. "This is precisely why the debt exists," he said. "You believe your action was normal. But, among the species here, how many would die for an unknown alien child?" Sarah looked around the chamber. The silence stretched uncomfortably long. "The Drakmor advance through this sector has been halted," continued a new voice. It belonged to Admiral Shundar of the Veltar fleet, her fiber-optic hair shifting through rapid red patterns that indicated urgency. "But they are regrouping. Our intelligence suggests they are preparing something called a final configuration, a weapon that could destroy entire star systems." Holographic displays materialized around the chamber, showing star maps with red zones indicating Drakmor-controlled space. Sarah gasped. The red areas covered nearly a quarter of the visible galaxy. "They have consumed 17 civilizations," Admiral Shundar continued. "Each time, they offer the same choice: submit and become slave workers in their industrial complexes, or be destroyed. No species has ever successfully resisted them for more than a few years. Until now," Caxthal growled. "The Kethvar have fought them to a standstill in the Helix Nebula. But we cannot hold our positions much longer without support." Sarah studied the tactical displays, her mind automatically analyzing the situation like she used to study migration patterns and predator territories. "What kind of support do you need?" "Alliance," said a Trixver representative, its multi-part voice creating harmony with itself. "The species in this sector have never united. We compete, we trade, sometimes we fight, but we do not truly cooperate. The Drakmor count on this," Admiral Shindar added. "They defeat us separately because we cannot work together." Sarah felt all the alien eyes in the chamber focusing on her. "What does this have to do with me?" Caxthal stood to his full height. "The Kethvar will follow you into battle. Our species respects strength, but more than that, we respect sacrifice for the innocent. You have both." "I'm not a military leader," Sarah protested. "I'm a veterinarian. I take care of animals." "You took care of Zix," pointed out a Zephi, representative, its crystalline body pulsing with soft light. And in doing so, you may have saved all of us. The chamber fell silent as new holographic displays appeared. These showed detailed scans of Drakmor forces, their weapon capabilities, and their tactical patterns. Sarah studied them with the same intensity she'd once used to track disease patterns in wildlife populations. "They're like a plague," she said finally. "They consume everything in their path, but they follow predictable patterns. Look at their expansion routes. They always take the systems with the most resources first, then use those resources to fuel the next expansion." Murmurs of interest rippled through the chamber. Sarah continued, her mind racing as connections formed. "But plagues can be stopped. You need to interrupt their resource flow and force them to fight on multiple fronts simultaneously." She pointed to areas on the star map. "Here, here, and here." If Allied forces could coordinate strikes on their supply lines while the Kethvar hold the main front, it could work, Admiral Shundar said, her colors shifting to excited yellow patterns. But it would require precise timing and complete trust between species who have never fought together before. Sarah felt Zix nuzzle against her leg and looked down at his 4 trusting eyes. In them, she saw not just an alien creature, but an orphan who had lost everything and somehow found hope again. Maybe that was what this war needed. Not another military genius, but someone who understood that survival sometimes meant protecting creatures you'd never met before. "If I do this," Sarah said, looking around the chamber, "we do it my way. No species gets sacrificed for strategic advantage. No population gets abandoned if they can be saved. We fight like a pack. We protect each other, or we don't fight at all." Caxthull's rumbling voice filled the chamber. "The Kethvar accept these terms. Do the others?" One by one, the alien representatives signaled their agreement. Sarah realized she had just agreed to lead a galactic alliance against an enemy she'd never seen, with species she barely understood. But as Zix looked up at her with absolute trust, she knew she would figure out. She'd saved one life by instinct. Now she would have to save thousands of species by design. The war for the galaxy was about to change. The first coordinated strike launched 6 weeks later. Sarah stood in the command center of the newly christened vessel Unity, watching dozens of holographic displays show Alliance forces moving into position across 3 star systems. The ship itself was a marvel of cooperative engineering. Veltar technology merged with Kethvar armor, powered by Zephi energy cores, and coordinated by Trixver computational networks. But the real miracle was what she was seeing on the tactical displays. Species who had barely spoken to each other for centuries were now fighting side by side. Kethvar assault teams in position at the Gamma installation, reported Commander Vexhal, a scarred warrior who served as Sarah's military advisor. Veltar support ships standing by. Trixver electronic warfare units have isolated the Delta Supply Depot, added collective voice Zermin, speaking for the hive mind representatives. Zephi precision strikes ready to execute. Sarah nodded, feeling the weight of command settle on her shoulders. This was nothing like treating injured animals, but somehow the principles felt similar. You had to understand each species' strengths, work with their natural behaviors instead of against them. And, most importantly, you had to earn their trust. Norlem infiltration successful at the primary fuel refinery, came another report. Their gaseous forms passed through the station's filtration systems undetected. Zix chirped softly from his position beside Sarah's command chair. He'd grown again, now nearly the size of a large dog, but his bond with her had only strengthened. The adult Kethvar found this unusual. Their young typically became more independent as they matured. But Zix seemed to understand that Sarah needed the comfort of a familiar companion in this strange new reality. "All units, this is Sarah Chun," she said into the communications array. "Remember, we're not just hitting their supplies. We're showing them that isolated species can become something stronger together. Execute in 3, 2, 1. Across 3 star systems, Alliance forces struck simultaneously. The results exceeded even Sarah's optimistic projections. The Kethvar assault teams, known for their individual prowess, had learned to fight in coordinated packs. Their natural hunting instincts, combined with Veltar tactical support, made them devastatingly effective against Drakmor ground forces. The Trixver collective intelligence had found ways to disrupt Drakmor communications that no single-minded species had ever discovered. Their hive minds could process and respond to changing battlefield conditions faster than any enemy could adapt. The Zephi, whose crystalline bodies could focus and redirect energy with perfect precision, turned Drakmor weapons against their own installations. Every shot the enemy fired was captured, amplified, and reflected back with devastating accuracy. And the Norlem. Sarah smiled as she watched their reports come in. The gaseous aliens had infiltrated deep into Drakmor facilities, sabotaging critical systems from inside. The enemy couldn't fight what they couldn't see or touch. All primary objectives achieved. Admiral Shundar reported, her fiber-optic hair blazing with triumphant gold patterns. Drakmor supply lines in all three systems have been severed. Cheers echoed through the command center in a dozen alien languages. But Sarah felt a chill of foreboding as new signals appeared on long-range sensors. "What's that massive signature approaching from the outer system?" she asked. The displays shifted to show a new threat. The Drakmor response was unlike anything in their intelligence files. A single ship, but massive beyond comprehension, larger than some of the smaller moons in the system. "Unknown vessel class," reported the sensor operator, a young Veltar whose colors flickered with confusion. "Mass readings suggest that can't be right." "What?" Sarah demanded. "According to our sensors, that ship has the mass of a small planet." The communication array crackled to life with an incoming transmission. The voice that emerged was harsh and mechanical, speaking perfect galactic standard. "Unknown Alliance forces. You have interfered with Drakmor expansion for the last time. Behold the World Ender, our final configuration. Surrender now, and your deaths will be swift. Resist, and we will ensure your species suffer for generations before extinction." The massive ship began moving toward their position with impossible speed for something of its size. As it approached, smaller vessels detached from its hull. Hundreds of them, each one larger than the Unity. "All ships, fall back to Rally Point 7, Sarah ordered, but even as she spoke, she knew they couldn't outrun something that big. "Sarah," Caxthal's voice rumbled with concern. "The Kethvar vessels cannot match that acceleration. If we retreat, we leave our strongest warriors to die." She looked at the tactical display, her mind racing through possibilities. Every scenario ended in disaster. The Alliance fleet was strong, but this world ender represented technology beyond anything they'd encountered. Then, Zix did something unexpected. The young Kethvar began making sounds Sarah had never heard before. Not the usual chirps or purrs, but something that resembled ancient singing. His four eyes were fixed on the tactical display, and his tail appendages were moving in complex patterns. "What is he doing?" Sarah asked. Caxthal's colors shifted to deep surprise. "That is impossible. He is singing the battle memory. But he is too young to know such things." "What's a battle memory?" "Ancient Kethvar tradition," Caxthal explained, his voice filled with wonder. Warriors who survived impossible battles would encode their experiences in song, passing tactical knowledge to future generations. But this particular memory, it speaks of facing enemies vast beyond measure. Zix's song grew more complex, and Sarah felt something strange happening. The sound seemed to resonate not just in her ears, but in her mind. Images flashed before her eyes, not her own memories, but ancient ones. Kethvar warriors facing impossible odds against creatures that blotted out stars. And in those memories, she saw something the Alliance could use. "The Drakmor ship is massive," Sarah said suddenly, understanding flooding through her. "But that makes it vulnerable in ways a smaller ship isn't." She turned to the assembled commanders. "How long would it take to modify our ship's engines to operate in reverse?" Reverse. Admiral Shundar's colors shifted to confusion. You mean to decelerate faster? No, Sarah said, her excitement growing as the plan formed. I'm going to make them run backward, to push instead of pull. Commander Vexhal's 4 eyes narrowed. Explain. Sarah called up a new tactical display. That ship is so massive it creates its own gravity well. If we could coordinate all our engines to push in the same direction. You want to use their own weapon size against them. Collective voice Zurmin buzzed with rapid calculations. Create controlled orbital mechanics to redirect their approach. Exactly. We can't destroy something that big, but we might be able to send it where we want it to go. Where would that be? Caxthal asked. Sarah smiled grimly and pointed to a specific location on the star map. Into the system's primary star. The command center fell silent as the implications sank in. It was an insane plan that required perfect coordination between species who had never attempted anything like it before. The timing would have to be exact, Admiral Shundar said finally. And if we miscalculate, we all die anyway if we do nothing, Sarah replied. At least this way, we die trying something they won't expect. Zix finished his ancient song and looked up at Sarah with those 4 trusting eyes. In them, she saw not just faith, but something else. The accumulated wisdom of his species, somehow passed to a cub too young to understand it himself. All ships, Sarah said into the communication array, prepare for the most dangerous maneuver in galactic history. We're going to teach the Drakmor that sometimes the biggest predator isn't the most dangerous one. The coordination required for Sarah's plan pushed every species in the Alliance beyond their limits. Veltar engineers worked around the clock to modify engine configurations they'd thought were impossible. Trixver collectives calculated orbital mechanics, so complex that their hive minds nearly overloaded from the processing demands. Zephi focused their crystalline forms to create perfect energy synchronization between ships that had never been designed to work together. And, through it all, Zix stayed close to Sarah, his presence somehow calming the chaos around them. Modification complete on 73% of the fleet, reported Chief Engineer Molvex, her Veltar colors cycling through exhausted gray patterns. The remaining ships will need another 6 hours. Sarah looked at the tactical display. The World Ender was still approaching, its massive bulk now visible to the naked eye through the observation windows. The thing was so large it looked like a metallic moon, bristling with weapons that could sterilize planets. We don't have 6 hours, she said. How many ships do we need for minimum effectiveness? Collective voice Zurmin's compound eyes flickered as the hive mind ran calculations. 68% of current fleet mass would provide a 37% probability of successful orbital insertion. Those aren't good odds, Commander Vexhal growled. They're better than 0, Sarah replied. And they're about to get worse if we wait. New contacts appeared on the sensors. The Drakmor escort fleet had detached from the World Ender and was moving to engage the Alliance forces. Hundreds of enemy ships, each one built for maximum destruction. Sarah, Caxthal said quietly, there is something you should know about the final configuration. Our intelligence was incomplete. She turned to face the massive Kethvar warrior. What do you mean? The World Ender is not just a weapon, he said, his 4 eyes reflecting grim knowledge. It is a mobile factory. Every world it destroys, every civilization it consumes, the raw materials are processed into more Drakmor ships and weapons. Each victory makes them stronger. Sarah felt ice form in her stomach. How many civilizations has it consumed? 17 confirmed. Possibly more. The implications hit her like a physical blow. The massive ship wasn't just carrying the firepower to destroy star systems. It was carrying the accumulated resources of entire species that had been ground up and reformed into instruments of war. That's why they're so confident, she whispered. They're not just fighting with their own strength. They're fighting with the stolen strength of everyone they've ever conquered. Alarms began sounding throughout the command center. The Drakmor escort fleet had opened fire, and Alliance ships were taking heavy casualties. "We need to execute the plan now," Admiral Shundar said urgently. "With or without full modifications." Sarah nodded, but something was bothering her. Zix had begun making soft sounds again. Not the ancient battle song, but something else. He was staring at the tactical display with an intensity that seemed almost supernatural. "Wait," Sarah said. "Zix, what are you seeing?" The young HFY pointed with one of his 6 legs at a specific section of the World Ender's hull. On the display, it looked like any other part of the massive ship, but Sarah had learned to trust the enhanced senses of her companion. "Scan that area," she ordered. Full spectrum analysis. The results made everyone in the command center stop what they were doing. "There's something inside that section," the sensor operator reported. "Energy readings suggest it's alive. Multiple life signs. Thousands of them." Sarah's blood ran cold. "Survivors?" "Unknown. But the readings match biological signatures from 17 different species." The horrible truth hit Sarah all at once. The World Ender wasn't just using the resources of conquered civilizations. It was carrying their people. Slaves, prisoners, or worse. "We can't send that ship into a star," she said. "There are innocent beings aboard." "Sarah," Caxthul said gently, "if we do not act, the World Ender will destroy countless more worlds. The calculation is clear." "No." Sarah's voice was firm. "There has to be another way." She studied the tactical display with desperate intensity. The Drakmor escort fleet was closing in. The World Ender was less than an hour from optimal firing position. And somewhere inside that massive ship, thousands of beings from dead civilizations were trapped. Then Zix did something that changed everything. The young HFY began singing again, but this time it wasn't an ancient battle memory. This was something new, something his own. And as he sang, Sarah felt her mind expand. Suddenly, she could see the battlefield differently. Not just as ships and weapons and tactical positions, but as a living system. The World Ender wasn't just a weapon. It was a parasite. And like any parasite, it had to maintain itself. "The life support systems," Sarah said suddenly. "A ship that big, carrying that many people, it would need massive environmental controls." She called up detailed scans of the World Ender structure. "Look at these energy patterns. See how they flow from the weapons systems to the life support. They're using the same power grid," Admiral Shundar realized. "But why would they design it that way?" "Because they never expected anyone to care about the prisoners," Sarah said grimly. "They thought we'd either surrender or try to destroy them outright." A new plan began forming in her mind, more dangerous than the first, but with a chance to save everyone. "What if we don't try to destroy the World Ender?" she said. "What if we try to capture it?" The command center erupted in protests from multiple species. "Impossible. The ship is too large. Our forces are insufficient." "No," Sarah said, raising her voice above the chaos. "Not capture the whole ship. Just capture its brain." She highlighted a section near the World Ender's core. "Every ship has a command center. Cut off the head, and the body follows." Commander Vexhal's scarred face showed skeptical interest. "A boarding action? Against a ship that size?" "Not a boarding action," Sarah corrected. "A surgical strike. Small teams, multiple entry points, all moving toward the command center simultaneously. The casualty rate would be enormous," Admiral Shundar pointed out. Sarah looked around the command center at the assembled representatives of a dozen species. Each one was afraid, but each one was also ready to fight. "Maybe," she said, "but if we succeed, we don't just win this battle. We gain access to everything the Drakmor have learned from 17 conquered civilizations. We turn their greatest weapon into our greatest intelligence asset." Zix made a soft chirping sound and nuzzled against Sarah's hand. In his 4 eyes, she saw absolute faith. And, Sarah added, "We saved thousands of innocent beings who thought they'd never see freedom again." The command center fell silent as everyone considered the implications. It was insane. It was nearly impossible. It would require every species in the Alliance to risk everything on a plan that had never been attempted before. But it was also the most human thing Sarah could imagine, refusing to sacrifice the innocent, even when victory seemed impossible without it. "The Kethvar will follow you," Caxthul said finally. One by one, the other species added their agreement. Sarah looked at the massive shape of the world ender on the tactical display and felt a familiar determination settle in her chest. She protected one innocent creature by instinct. Now she would protect thousands by design. The real battle was about to begin. The assault on the world ender began at dawn. Though in space, dawn was just an arbitrary point Sarah chose to mark the moment when everything would change. 12 strike teams launched simultaneously from different Alliance ships. Each team was small, specialized, and absolutely deadly. Kethvar warriors provided assault capability. Veltar technicians handled electronic warfare. Trixver collective minds maintained communication and coordination. Zephi energy specialists dealt with defensive systems. And Norlem scouts had already infiltrated the target to map internal routes. Sarah led the primary team herself, with Zix at her side and Caxthul providing military expertise. As their assault craft approached the world ender's hull, the true scale of the enemy ship became overwhelming. It wasn't just large. It was like approaching a metallic continent floating in space. "Hull breaching charges set," reported Lieutenant Zaref, a young Kethvar whose 4 eyes glowed with battle readiness. "But the armor is thicker than our intelligence suggested." "Use shaped charges with Zephi, focusing crystals," Sarah suggested. "Focus the energy into a needlepoint rather than dispersing it." The modification worked perfectly. The Alliance had learned to combine their technologies in ways no single species had ever imagined. The hull breach opened like a flower, revealing the interior of the Drakmor ship. What they found inside defied Sarah's worst expectations. The corridors were vast, designed for beings much larger than any species in the Alliance. But they weren't empty. Mechanical constructs patrolled in regular patterns, not quite robots, but not quite alive either. Each one was built from materials Sarah recognized with growing horror. "Those aren't just machines," she whispered into her comm. "They're made from pieces of conquered species. Crystalline components that looked like Zephi body parts. Organic processing units that resembled Trixver neural tissue. Metallic frames that could have come from Veltar technology. The Drakmor weren't just consuming civilizations. They were rebuilding them as servants." "Focus on the mission," Caxthul growled, but Sarah could hear the rage in his voice. "We free the prisoners first. We mourn the dead later." They moved through the ship's corridors using intelligence provided by the Norlem scouts. The gaseous aliens had mapped not just the physical layout, but also the patrol patterns, security systems, and, most importantly, the location of the life support systems holding the survivors. The first prison section they reached broke Sarah's heart. Hundreds of beings from species she'd never seen before were held in energy fields that kept them barely alive. They looked like they'd been imprisoned for years, maybe decades. When they saw the Alliance team, most didn't even react. Hope had been beaten out of them long ago. "Free them quickly," Sarah ordered, "but quietly. We can't alert the main ship until all teams are in position." Veltar technology interfaced with Drakmor containment systems in ways the enemy had never anticipated. The energy fields flickered and died, releasing prisoners who could barely stand. "We're here to help," Sarah said gently, approaching a being that looked like a cross between a bird and a tree. "Can you walk? Can you help others who can't?" The creature's response was in a language she'd never heard, but the tone was universal, gratitude mixed with disbelief. As they moved deeper into the ship, Sarah's team freed prison section after prison section. Hundreds became thousands. The survivors were from civilizations that had been destroyed years or decades ago. But the Drakmor had kept them alive for reasons that became clearer as they approached the ship's core. "They're using them as living computers," Sarah realized as they passed a section where prisoners were connected to the ship's systems by neural interfaces. Their brains are processing the ship's functions. Abomination, Caxthul snarled. They will pay for this. Yes, Sarah agreed. They will. The command center was exactly where the Norlem scouts had predicted, a vast chamber at the heart of the ship, protected by defensive systems that would have stopped any conventional assault. But the Alliance team wasn't conventional. HFY specialists had learned to redirect energy in ways that turned the Drakmor's own weapons against them. Tricks for electronic warfare overwhelmed defensive computers with processing loads they couldn't handle. Kethvar warriors moved through the chaos with predator efficiency that no Drakmor had ever faced. And Sarah coordinated it all with the same calm, focus she'd once used to treat injured animals. The Drakmor command staff was unlike anything in the Alliance databases. They were enormous, nearly 15 feet tall, with cybernetic enhancements that made them more machine than organic. But they moved slowly, apparently unused to facing real opposition. Impossible, the Drakmor commander rumbled as Alliance forces poured into the command center. No species has ever penetrated this ship. You're right, Sarah said, approaching the massive figure with Zix at her side. No species has. But we're not just one species anymore. The final battle was brief, but decisive. Caxthul personally defeated the Drakmor commander in single combat, while Alliance technicians took control of the ship's systems. Within minutes, the World Ender belonged to the Alliance. But the real victory came when Sarah activated the ship's communication system and spoke to every surviving prisoner aboard. "This is Commander Sarah Chun of the Alliance fleet," she said, her voice carrying throughout the massive ship. "You are free. All of you. The Drakmor Empire ends here." The response was overwhelming. Thousands of voices in hundreds of languages, all expressing the same thing: joy, relief, and most importantly, hope. As Alliance ships began arriving to evacuate the liberated prisoners, Sarah stood in the World Ender's observation deck, looking out at the fleet they'd assembled. Ships from a dozen species, all working together. Crews who had been enemies just months ago, now coordinating rescue operations with perfect precision. Zix chirped softly and nuzzled against her leg. He'd grown again during the battle, not physically, but in some intangible way. The playful cub was becoming something more mature, more aware of his place in the larger galaxy. "You know," Sarah said, scratching behind his auditory organs, "I think your species has the right idea about blood debts. Sometimes the most important thing you can do is protect someone who can't protect themselves." Caxthul approached, his colors shifting through patterns Sarah had learned indicated deep respect. "The Kethvar debt is paid," he said formally. "But if you will have us, we would be honored to continue fighting beside you." Sarah looked around the command center, now filled with representatives from the liberated species. Some she recognized from Alliance databases, but others were completely new, civilizations that had been thought extinct, now given a chance to rebuild. "Actually," she said, "I think the real fight is just beginning. The Drakmor Empire is vast, and there are probably thousands of ships like this one scattered across the galaxy. Each one carrying prisoners who think rescue is impossible. You propose to hunt them all?" Admiral Shindar asked, her fiber-optic hair blazing with excited gold patterns. "I propose something better," Sarah replied. "We're going to teach the galaxy that cooperation is stronger than conquest. That diversity is more powerful than conformity. And that sometimes the best way to honor those you've lost is to save those you've never met." She activated the long-range communication array, sending a message that would reach every inhabited system in the sector. "This is the Alliance fleet. The Drakmor Empire told you that resistance was futile, that submission was the only choice. They were wrong. We are proof that species working together can accomplish the impossible. Join us and help us free the galaxy." The responses began arriving immediately. Dozens, then hundreds of signals from worlds that have been hiding, waiting, hoping for exactly this moment. Zix looked up at Sarah with his four bright eyes and made a sound she'd never heard before. Not a chirp or a purr, but something that sounded almost like laughter. Sarah smiled and looked out at the growing fleet of Alliance ships. She died protecting one innocent creature and somehow found herself leading a galactic revolution. It wasn't the life she planned, but as she watched former enemies working together to rescue prisoners from a dozen different species, she realized it was exactly the life she was meant to live. The Drakmor Empire had lasted for millennia, built on the principle that the strong should dominate the weak. But they'd made one crucial mistake. They'd never encountered a species that defined strength as the willingness to protect others, regardless of the cost. They'd never faced humanity. And now, with the wisdom of a dozen allied species and the determination of a veterinarian who refused to let innocents suffer, that definition of strength was spreading across the galaxy like wildfire. The age of conquest was ending. The age of cooperation had begun.